everyone. Today we're going to continue on chapter 11. In the last lesson, we focused specifically on the heart's anatomy in the different chambers, the valves, and what they're all called, because today we're going to focus on the physiology part of it. How is blood pumped through the heart? So one thing to understand about blood circulation is that the heart functions as a double pump. What that means is that part of the heart is pumping blood to your lungs while the other heart is pumping it to the rest of your body. And we're going to talk about that a little bit down below. But what we need to understand are these terms for our blood vessels. You're going to hear the words artery versus veins. And these are very important terms to understand the difference. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, while veins tend to carry blood towards the heart. Now back to this concept of the double pump. The right side of our heart actually works as the pulmonary circuit pump. Remember, if you ever hear the word pulmonary, you're thinking lungs. Also, it says the right side, but when you're looking at a picture, it's going to appear to be the left. Now, this part of the heart receives blood from the body and pumps that blood to the lungs in order to be reoxygenated. The left side works on the systemic circuit pump. So systemic means the rest of the body or your system. This is going to receive blood from your lungs and then pumps that oxygenated blood to the rest of your body so that your muscles and cells can use it to undergo cellular respiration for energy. So let's focus on pulmonary circulation first. Remember, pulmonary circulation is where blood flows from the right side of the heart to the lungs and back on the left side of the heart. Now, remember that when I say these terms, when you're looking at a picture, it's going to be a mirrored image. So while it does say the right side, notice all my arrows are pointing to the left. So our first part says deoxygenated blood, and all that means is that it doesn't have oxygen. This blood enters into our right atrium, located right here, through two different routes, the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. So our superior vena cava brings blood from the upper body, and our inferior vena cava brings things from the lower half of the body. And they all dump into this right atrium cavity. Then what happens is blood travels through the right atrium to the right ventricle, and it does this through our tricuspid valve. And then this right ventricle pumps blood out of the right side through the pulmonary trunk. So it ends up going, blood's here, it's going to travel down to our ventricle. The ventricle is going to contract and pump blood up through our trunk. And then our trunk splits into our right and left pulmonary arteries, which is going to take blood away from the heart and to the lungs. Notice that here our color is blue, and the blue indicates that it is oxygen poor or deoxygenated. For the pulmonary circulation, once it reaches the lungs, which is on either side, it picks up oxygen and it releases carbon dioxide. Then that oxygen-rich blood actually returns to the left atrium, which is over here on this side, through pulmonary veins. So here, my pulmonary veins are right here and right here. Notice that pulmonary veins are red because they are oxygenated. So again, oxygen-rich is indicated by red. That begins the beginning of systemic circulation. So remember, systemic circulation is blood flows from the left side of the heart to the body and back to the right side of the heart. Again, we're going to pick up where we left off, where we talked about oxygen-rich blood has now returned to the left atrium via the pulmonary veins. So once all this blood pulls into the left atrium, what happens is blood is going to travel through the left atrium, through your mitral or bicuspid valve, down here into the left ventricle. Then your left ventricle is going to contract, and it's going to send the blood through your aortic semilunar valve out your aorta, where it's going to get pumped to the rest of your body. And we're going to learn about those blood vessels later on. Now, one thing I do want to pick up is that the left ventricle has thicker walls, and you're going to notice that like this part of the walls are a lot thicker than the other side. And that is because it needs a lot more force and power to be able to pump the blood all throughout your systemic circuit in order to reach your toes and to reach your head. This oxygenated blood is going to circulate through our systemic arteries into all of our body tissues. Okay. And then where it'll eventually all end up at the beginning of our pulmonary circuit, where blood is flowing back into the right atrium from the superior and inferior vena cava. Okay. So here is a picture that we kind of see. There are different ways to give this picture. And one thing I want you to notice is that they have a key down here. Please, if you don't remember this, please write it down. Oxygen-rich blood tends to be red. Oxygen-poor blood tends to be blue. Notice that oxygen-poor blood tends to stay on the right side of the heart, and oxygen-rich blood is more on the left. So again, let's go through this path. Blood comes into my right atrium for my superior and inferior vena cava. Then it travels down to my right ventricle, where it is going to be pumped out my pulmonary trunk. It leaves through the arteries that will go to the lungs. Notice here that this part right here is like a purplish red because it's picking up oxygen. So this part right here, these are called capillary beds. That's going to become important in your homework. This is where gas exchange takes place. In fact, I would write that in your notes. Then it's going to pick up that oxygen and it's going to be transported back to your heart via your pulmonary veins, and it's going to empty into your left atrium. Blood is then going to flow down to your left ventricle, where it will be pumped out our aorta to the rest of the body. So down here, this is showing capillary beds in the rest of the body. It's going to use that oxygen and send that deoxygenated blood back to begin circulation again. Now, we did talk about heart valves, so we're going to talk about them in a little bit more detail. So we had AV valves. Remember, AV stands for atrioventricular valves. And remember, atrioventricular valves are going to be your tricuspid valves and your bicuspid valve. So what the AV valves do is they anchor the cusps in place by something called chordae tendineae, and these are anchored to the walls of the ventricles. Our AV valves are going to be open when the heart is relaxed, and they're going to be open because we want blood to passively flow from our atrium to our ventricles. And then they're going to be closed whenever the ventricles contract because we want the blood to go from the ventricles to the lungs or the body, not back up to the atrium. Semilunar valves, they're going to be the opposite. These are going to be closed during heart relaxation and then open during when the ventricles contract. So one thing to note is that valves open and close in response to pressure changes within our heart. So it's a lot easier to kind of look at a picture of this and to describe it than to just talk about it. So let's have a picture to go along with it. Here, we're going to look at the operation of our AV valves. It says blood is returning to the atria, puts pressure against our AV valves, and then these AV valves are going to be forced open. So here, notice that here our AV valves are open right here and right here. And this allows blood to flow from our atria up here down to our ventricles. Atria then are going to contract to force out any remaining blood that's in them into these ventricles. Then, once the ventricles fill up, this pressure change causes our AV valves to close. So notice, see how they're closing? And we want to keep those closed because we don't want the blood to flow back up to the atria. We want to keep it going in one direction. So when this contracts, it's not going to send blood back up to the atrium. It's going to send it out through our major blood vessels. Opposite of our semilunar valves. So here, our semilunar valves are going to be open when our ventricles contract. Because when our ventricles contract, we want blood to go out them, so that's why they're going to be located and be open. And then, of course, once they get contracted out, here our semilunar valves are going to be closed during our semilunar valves are going to be closed during relaxation. The last thing we're going to talk about in this lesson is something called cardiac circulation, because we are talking about heart circulation. So one thing to note is that the blood that's in our heart chambers that nourishes the rest of our body doesn't actually nourish the myocardium or the heart muscle. The heart actually has its own circulatory system, and it consists of coronary arteries, cardiac veins, and coronary sinuses. So our coronary arteries, these are going to branch off of our aorta. That's important to know, and it supplies the heart muscle with a bunch of oxygenated blood. Well, that blood has to drain, so it drains through something known as cardiac veins. And all of that drained blood actually collects in the posterior part of the heart. There's a large vein called the coronary sinus, and this receives all of the blood that's draining to eventually be emptied out into the right atrium. So again, that's also something important to know. So again, the heart gets blood from a branching off of the aorta, and it returns it to the right atrium just like all the other blood. So as a couple fun facts, as the heart beats or contracts, the blood makes continuous round trips into and out of the heart, through the rest of the body, and then back to the heart, only to be sent out again. In one day, it can push the body supply of blood about 6 quarts through the blood vessels 1,000 times. So what that means is our heart actually pumps about 6,000 quarts or 1,500 gallons of blood in a single day. Again, here is the picture of the gross anatomy of the heart, but this is going to be located on the outside. I really wanted to bring this picture in because it does show here our coronary arteries. So here in red is going to be our coronary arteries. We have a left coronary artery, and then over here we have the right coronary artery. And then typically when you guys have a heart attack, it's because one of these coronary arteries are blocked, because this is what is nourishing our heart. And then in the blue, these are going to be our cardiac veins. So we have our anterior cardiac vein. Over here, we have a small cardiac vein. Here we have the great cardiac vein, and they all empty into your coronary sinus, which will drain the heart of its blood and empty it back into that right atrium. And that's the end of today's lesson. If you have any questions, please make sure you ask, and I hope you guys have a great day.